try to be fair to David Moyes. I really do. When we were in 8th position, I did a video and I said, do you know what? Actually, having looked at it, we're exactly where we should be in terms of money spent. And that is sort of right. However, now I look at it now, and I know this is awfully reactionary, but now we're down to 11th. We still only have 14 points. It's still 14 points after 11 games, which ain't bad, but it's ceased being good, hasn't it? Let's be honest. And we're now, our goal difference has taken a hit. We're at -2. But I think now the question has to be asked, bearing in mind David Moyes has spent 460 million at West Ham. What's his answer to what's going on here? Because I think that was incredibly frustrating. And I do think David Moyes should be made to answer some of these questions because Moyes was incredibly spiky. If you remember, he had an interview after the game against Arsenal. He was very, very spiky with the interviewer. Very keen to remind her what she'd said in the build-up to the game. And, of course, afterwards, he was a little bit smug. He'd won the game, and he reminded her that if you're going to be spiky like that, if you're going to start bringing things up, then you're going to bring attention on you, and you deserve things to be brought up against yourself. Because that was a terrible, terrible result against Brentford. Now, not going into it, don't get me wrong, okay? I think you can lose to Brentford. You absolutely can. What you can't do is be in a position where you're winning the game and then lose in that fashion. I'd be asking some questions. If I was a West Ham owners, I'd be saying, what the hell happened in the dressing room at half-time? I would ask that question. It absolutely deserves to be so. Where do we start with that game? Okay, how did a central defensive partnership that looked so good against Arsenal turn into that today? Turn into that performance that we've just seen against Brentford? I have absolutely no idea at all. I'm pretty sure David Moyes' excuses, and I've not heard them, I've not listened to his post-match press conference. You know what? I don't want to. I can't even be bothered to listen to the bloke speak. But I'm sure there's going to be talk of Lucas Paquetá and Edson Alvarez and Kurt Zouma. Is that what it's got to? After all the money spent, it would come down to those players. Well, why can't he just see the evidence that's in front of him? Now, don't get me wrong. I actually think that Saïd Benrahma has had worse games for West Ham this season than the one he had against Arsenal and the one he had against Brentford. That being said, it is blatantly obvious that he is not quick enough. He's getting outpaced by lumbering big central defenders. As a winger, he ain't cutting it, quite frankly. So again, I would be asking the question, bearing in mind you sanctioned this £17 million purchase of Maxwell Cornet, why don't you play him? If what you're saying is, I'm fed up with him, we've fallen out, I will no longer play him, come out and say it. Or even, I'm not saying necessarily say it to the press. Tell the owners so at least they know. I'm not going to play him. So what's the point of him being on the bench? I absolutely don't know. And as for Danny Ings, it's not even about him personally, but as I say, I'm going to stop apologising for my opinion on Danny Ings. Wrong player, wrong club, wrong time. Everyone knows it. Why does David Moyes persist? It felt like two fingers up to everybody. And of course it wasn't. David Moyes would have wanted to win that game. He absolutely would. I don't doubt that at all. I don't buy into this theory that the games David Moyes wins, someone else did the tactics, and the games David Moyes loses, he did the tactics. Too convenient, too easy. And we've heard it since Alan Irvine was here. Let's be perfectly honest, right? I just don't buy into that. But what I do not like is the fact that he seems to be able to cherry pick his instances when he is choosing these players, even irrespective of the mounting evidence against them. There was no evidence to play Danny Ings. None. Why do you keep doing it? I just don't get it. He knows. He must know that was going to be an ineffective substitution. And I know this isn't true. This is what I'm saying. David Moyes wants to win games. That's my point. But it feels like he's throwing the game when he brings him on. Pablo Fornals, I look at Fornals' last few games for West Ham. He has checked out. And I don't blame him. I can make, if you want, we could do a separate video. I can make all the excuses in the world for why Pablo Fornals has been hard done by David Moyes at West Ham. However, once you accept that Danny Ings shouldn't be signing for West Ham, it was the wrong player for the wrong system. Once you accept that Pablo Fornals is not the same player that we bought, and it's probably not his fault, you are still left with the fact that both players are ill-suited to what we're trying to do this season. So why play them? I just don't get it. We needed to get back into that game. Surely bring Cornet on, bring Mubama on, do any number of other things aside from what you've just been doing. I'm incredibly frustrated to think that how bad Mikel Antonio was. And to look at that game and think, we seem to be one striker. Sometimes, I know it's maybe I'm underplaying it a little bit. We seem to be one striker away from having a really good team, but he won't do it. He divers and he delays. And quite frankly, the record in the Premier League now, looking at it now, it seems like a long time since we had a win. Well, it was 5 games ago, the last time we had our win. You can do that when you're trying to fight, I don't know, whatever. When you first come in and you've fought relegation, but you don't have that much money. Not when you spent 460 odd million. You don't get to do that. You really don't. You certainly don't get to do it. And do you know what? I'm ranting now, but I'm quite annoyed about the whole situation. It has to be said. So there were any number of things he should have done rather than no substitutions. But it's not just the substitutions. It was the way. At the start of that game, or even in the first half, Jarrod Bowen and Mohammed Kudus were really, really sharp, snappy, incisive, skillful. By the end of it, they'd lost their skill and they'd lost their technique as well. It was like a little microcosm, funny enough, as what happened to Pablo Fornells over his West Ham career and what started to happen to Said Benrahma. Funny enough, you saw it, even though it's elongated over a whole contract with Fornells, like whatever, from the age of 22 to 27 it's happened. You actually saw it happen within a game to Mohammed Kudus. It all happened within one game. Because by the end of it, he couldn't cross, he couldn't pass. It was just, he'd lost it. And I don't think that David Moyes necessarily loses the dressing room. I think every time it's said, a little while back, we come and we put in a good performance. But I got to say, he must be draining the motivation out of some of those players. That cannot be hard. All the players must have felt elated going 2-1 up. There's a feel-good factor about it. There's a buzz about the team. There's a buzz about the squad. And whatever happens, and I know I joke about morphine and singing lullabies at half-time and all the rest of it, but seriously, what does happen? What happens in that change room that makes them come out like that? I don't think it's just West Ham, by the way. I don't think it's just David Moyes. I think Thomas Frank went in at half-time, changed something, and David Moyes didn't know what he did and couldn't find an answer. And therein lies a massive, massive problem. I don't know how long this is going to be allowed to go on for. And I don't just mean when is David Moyes going to be sacked or replaced or whatever. When is David Moyes actually going to change? How long do you think you get? He has been at West Ham a long time. In managerial terms, modern managerial terms, a long time. What, back in the olden days? Probably not. In the days when Kenny Dalglish was at Liverpool and John Lyall was at West Ham before that, or whatever, Howard Kendall was at Everton. Back in those days, managers got years, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Not now. At the moment, the amount of time David Moyes has been at West Ham, which is nearly 4 years, a long bloody time. And that's what I said before. Why is he still building? There's always something. I don't know how did Aston Villa, by the way, when he came in, Aston Villa were below us. First season, second season below us, third season below us. Then we get this big thing where, hold on, suddenly Aston Villa are the best thing since sliced bread. Oh, yeah, well, we need to be a bit more like Aston Villa. Well, you were better than them. We were actually better than them when you came in, mate. So, and you hear this same thing about Brentford, they're so well organised and all the rest of it. Give it a rest. Brentford would love to spend the money that West Ham spend. They would love it. They really would. They can't afford to spend the money that we do on transfer fees, and they certainly can't afford to spend the money on wages. It's really not. And it's not about Moyes in or Moyes out. It's actually about what you're going to do. Take a little bit of responsibility instead of being totally bloody offended by what a journalist says, and get out there and not only prove it right with your words, and don't prove it right with just a cup win, prove it right in the league. Honestly, the worst thing is that we were ahead in that game. And just there was so much was utterly wrong with what went on. By the end of it, it was a capitulation. I am surprised we only conceded 3. Brentford deserved to win that game. They absolutely did. But that's because we kept on inviting wave upon us. It's that all it takes. All it takes is for a couple of players to be out, and then David Moyes just does not know how to do it. They were like a tsunami crashing against the seawall. They really were, time and time again. And the longer it went on, the worse it got. I thought Agurd was abysmal. Do you know what? I think Agurd's got some really good characteristics, got some really good techniques. And I think he'd probably be a really good player in a top team. But he's not the defender that none of them do. When you put them under that much pressure, would have to defend and defend and defend, and they're defending for 70% of the game, you just put in so much pressure on them and they crumble. And that's just what happens. And I think then that's the answer to it. The difference between what happened against Arsenal and what happened against Brentford there, I just think he asks too much. Too much, just basically to repel the opposition time after time after time. I'd like to hear some answers from David Moyes. I'd like some tough questions asked as well. I'd like to know, firstly, why did Soufal run all the way over at the end to the other side of the pitch to put that long throw over? I'd like to say to him in a press conference, David, do you know your statistical success rate from long throws? Do you know what they are? I mean, I don't. But I want to know if he does. Because I tell you what, I don't know what figure it is, but I know it's crap. And I know it doesn't work. Mix it up. I tell you what I also know. I know that they're expecting it. And the one time we gave an opposition a little bit of a surprise by the formation. West Ham never played 4-4-2. We did at the start of that game. We actually managed to do something. Where was it? It's like we had that one get-out-of-jail-free card and we played it and then it just all went and the whole thing dissipated. Anyway, excuse me. I'm ranting, I'm annoyed, I'm sure a lot of you are too.